This is Docs Outside the Box, episode 28.
Welcome to Docs Outside the Box podcast. This is your official show, looking inside the minds of cutting-edge and innovative doctors. Think you'll find these stories in any medical textbook? Sorry, you're getting real life insight from men and women pushing the envelope beyond medicine. Ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things. Let's start now with your host, Dr. Nee Darko.
What is good, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Docs Outside the Box. I shouldn't have left you without a dope podcast to step to. Yo, I know it has been way too long. I know people are worried that maybe the podcast had stopped or something had happened to me, but none of that has happened. Life just happens. It's been over about 2 months since the last podcast, and some good things are, I welcomed a new child. Me and my wife welcomed a new child into the world. So a little bit of some workflow issues have caused the show to be a little bit on a delay / hiatus, but I just wanted to let you all know that the show's not going anywhere. Just had to change a little bit of the workflow, had to get some help, and we're back. I'm back. I'm energized. I'm ready to go. I've got a huge backlog of interviews that you all are going to enjoy. So let's once again take it back to the beginning. Remember, this is Dr. Nee Darko. I am the Doc Outside the Box, host of Docs Outside the Box podcast, where I'm inspiring doctors like you who are all over around the world to live outside the box by bringing you stories of ordinary doctors who are doing extraordinary things. And the last episode was the last week in June, and from June till now, a lot of stuff has been going on. And, real quick before we get into our episode, and I got a good one for you. There's been a couple of episodes where I have taken a moment to talk about my favorite things like the New York Knicks, or talk about hip hop, or things just not related to Docs Outside the Box. And with things that have been going on over the past 2 months, it just doesn't really make sense to be able to give light to those things that aren't so heavy, like sports and music, and then gloss over these important issues. It just, to me, doesn't seem right. And I've always said, and I've always thought in my mind, that if I'm going to have my own show, then I'm going to be able to have my own voice, no matter, who it upsets or things of that nature. So with me, I'm just briefly going to talk about what's going on in Charlottesville. I'm not going to talk about the same things that we've talked about over and over again. I think that goes without saying that obviously what happened there is horrible. But I think it goes without saying that, look, we got to continue to marginalize those type of thoughts, those type of actions. But from a what can I do level, from a simple grassroots level, what can we do? My advice is that we got to continue to have the very awkward conversations with each other, white, black, white, about what's wrong, what's right, what we perceive to be wrongs that are going on in society. And we have to be able to have those conversations without getting too, taking it too personal, and being able to understand the other side. So I've taken it upon myself to have these very uncomfortable conversations, not just within my home, but also with coworkers and with anybody else who, where this situation comes up. I try not to shy away from that conversation because I think it needs to stay in the forefront. So if you guys are looking for what can I do, what is something that I can do to kind of not let this situation go away and to keep it on the forefront, I think each and every one of us on a granular level can just do that. Just continue to have that conversation, whether it's with coworkers, whether it's with family members. Continue to keep this situation, these type of conversations in the forefront. And anybody else who wants to talk about this, anybody who wants to hit me up, please remember you can always get me through Twitter. You can get me through Facebook as well as through Instagram, and I'll be willing to have this type of conversation. Let's not make it too much on fire. Let's not flame each other. Let's not troll each other, but I'm willing to have this conversation online also. But that leads me to my next, or that's really not really a good segue, but let's go on to our next guest. Our next guest is actually someone that I have been wanting to get on the show for a long time, and we actually have the anonymous creator of the famed Physician on Fire website. He does not have a name. He goes by an anonymous name of Physician on Fire, and this website started back in 2016, and I've been a fan of his writings. I've been a fan of his writings for a couple of reasons. One is he's very consistent, which, as you know, as a physician and writing a blog, those are two very difficult things to do. But, as of 2008, there was a slew of personal finance, bloggers and podcasts that have come out for various reasons. Obviously, the biggest thing is 2008, the huge financial downturn. People had to learn to be more frugal. People had to learn to be a lot more savvier with their finances. So people created blogs, and a lot of people who were consuming this created the stage for bloggers to just explode. And my next guest, Physician on Fire, I have seen his website grow from humble beginnings in 2016 to a very robust and very almost lucrative, or not almost, but lucrative website for him. So Physician on Fire is a website. It's a blog that is about personal finance. It's about early retirement. It's about medicine, and it's about everything in between. He practices what he preaches, and to really underscore that, he became financially independent, which means basically he doesn't need to go to work on a daily basis to have the current lifestyle that he has. But he reached financial independence at the age of 39. And, since his first post in 2016, the rest is history. The thing about his website is very easy to read. His posts are easy to follow. I mean, he focuses on education. He focuses on investing and compounding interest. He focuses on frugality. And the other thing that's really good about his website is that there is a charitable mission to it also. So literally half of the profits from his website go to charitable things such as the local Salvation Army in his area, the local library, soup kitchens, the local parent-teacher organization. So it's all for a good reason. Very briefly, Physician on Fire was born in Minnesota. He went to college, undergrad at the University of Minnesota, and then also stayed there to do his medical school training also. And then he did his residency in anesthesiology. So some of the things that I want you to pick up from this podcast are what it means to be financially independent. So he goes by Physician on Fire. FIRE means, or it's an acronym of F.I.R.E. We're going to find out what that means. We're also going to learn the difference between wealth and income, which is a big deal for us physicians, where people think that we have a lot of wealth just because we have a high income. But Physician on Fire, he lays down the law and he lets us know the true difference between wealth and income. He also gives advice for medical students and residents on how to start the path to financial independence. He's also going to give us some high yield tips on getting on the road to financial independence, as well as some simple strategies of investing that Physician on Fire uses. I'm actually pretty shocked at how simple his strategy is. He's going to give his thoughts on robo-advisors versus financial advisors, as well as compare and act to investing while doing it yourself. And obviously, he's going to answer hashtag I'm not just a doc. So without further ado, let's bring on Physician on Fire. We are back with another episode of Docs Outside the Box, and I am really excited. Have been anticipating this interview for a long time. I have the one, the only, working your way up to legendary status, Physician on Fire, with his famous blog, Physician on Fire. He is on the show. Physician on Fire, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm excited to be talking to you once again, and I think you maybe overstated my famous nature, but I do appreciate the kind words, and I'm excited to chat more.
Hey, listen, we got a lot to talk about. Obviously, you've been very successful within the financial realm. Obviously, your blog is very, very well read, is well talked about. But before we get into all of that, let's just learn a little bit about yourself. I know you're anonymous, but tell us a little bit about where you're from.
Sure. Yeah. And before I do that, I do want to say congratulations to you on your new baby boy, 1 month old boy. That's super exciting. I've got a couple of boys myself. Yeah. So I know how it is.
Catch up.
Yeah. One down, one to go. Mine are 6 years old and 8 years old. So got a little bit of a head start.
She's like, look, we just had one. Let's just chill for a little bit. But thank you very much for the congratulations, man.
You bet. Yeah, that's awesome. As far as me, I grew up in Minnesota, and I was born and raised in southern Minnesota, spent some time in northern Minnesota, and then when it came time to go to college, I stayed close to home. I thought I might go off to a prestigious school somewhere, but ended up receiving a full tuition scholarship and a number of other scholarships to our state's flagship university, the University of Minnesota. So I actually followed in my parents' footsteps and one of my grandfathers as well, and got a degree from the University of Minnesota. Been a Golden Gopher for 8 years because I stayed there for medical school as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the rest is basically anonymous.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
I did end up kind of doing the snowbird thing. I decided if I wasn't going to stay close to home, I'd go south. So I did residency down south for a while, but ended up back north.
Back north. Okay. And you are practicing in the Midwest, in the northern Midwest, right?
Indeed. Yeah. I'm actually back in my home state. I've kind of put that out there on the blog, so we can talk about that. But
okay.
Bounced around quite a bit too. Like you, I did some locums work, and my first actual 2 years after residency were purely locums work. And I wanted to kind of see what kind of jobs were out there, what it was like to work my own room at a hospital, what it was like to supervise 3 or 4, what it was like to work in a big place like a VA hospital, which was one of my stops. And
that's a big deal coming right out of residency.
Yeah, you have no experience. You've just done the one thing. Oftentimes in one hospital and maybe a couple facilities that you train in. So, and in anesthesia in particular, there are different ways you can practice. Like I say, you can just have one patient at a time, or you can manage an entire OR suite and OB and everything else. So kind of figured out what fit my personality, what I wanted to do. So
So after locums work, where you obviously you got a lot of experience being on your own, working on your own, and also at the same time earning a really good salary, I'm assuming, or some good income as a 1099.
I did. I made basically a full-time attending salary right out of the gate, and my expenses were pretty much covered by the places that hired me, temporarily. So, hotel, rental car, flights, basically even a per diem for food. So I had
per diem for food.
I got $25 a day on some of those jobs. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. I know. That's not common, actually.
Right. And then, well, it depends. And it's, it's all sort of fungible. So if they give you an extra 25, maybe the rate's a little bit different, but some of it's negotiable too.
Gotcha.
If you don't ask, you don't get.
That is true. That is true. Yeah. Now, how did all of this start? Like this path to financial freedom, all of this, great decision-making ability with money. Is that something that you grew up with, or is that something that you kind of developed along the way?
Yeah, I think I grew up, seeing my parents as role models. My dad was a dentist, so he made a pretty good living, but he wasn't a big spender in certain ways. Garage sales and thrift stores, and learned to look for value. And so I just, carried that on when I started out my adult life, when I started adulting, as the kids say now. I, kind of took the same philosophy and looked for ways to get nice things without spending a ton of money. And it wasn't intentional. Like, I didn't start out my career thinking I'd like to have the option to not do this in 10 years. That's kind of a defeatist attitude if you actually went into medicine because you want to be a doctor. But I just knew that I wanted to save money. I knew that the more I saved early on, the more I would have time to compound and grow. And so I started setting aside, tens of thousands of dollars every year from day one, and pretty soon 6 figures a year. So yeah, it kind of ballooned up. The stock market has cooperated quite nicely over the 11 years now that I've been out of residency.
Right.
And it was a couple of years ago I realized that I more or less had enough money to make work optional for me and for my.
So that was something that was an end result of you doing really good in investing, is being able to find out that you could retire early. It wasn't what you set out to do initially.
No, yeah, and that's just a natural byproduct of buying and holding, and I don't even know what to call it. Smart investing. It's just simple investing. I didn't pick stocks. I just bought big index mutual funds that own all the companies. I have a 3-fund portfolio, just a total stock market fund, a total bond fund, and an international stock fund is a really easy way to start out. That's not exactly what I did, but that would probably be what I would do if I were starting out today.
Short and simple, and
yeah.
So what's your thoughts on being anonymous? Because obviously, with after 2008, there was just a slew of personal finance blogs that have come out, and a good portion of them are anonymous. So can you tell us your reason for being anonymous and how that's gone so far?
Sure. When I realized that I was now financially independent, and that was a little less than 10 years into my career, I thought that was pretty remarkable, and I thought it was a story worth sharing. And I thought I'd probably, maybe, most likely would want to retire early. Maybe in 5 years was kind of the thinking at the time, but I didn't know for sure, if I would do that. And so, but I wanted to write about it, and I didn't want maybe the people I work with to see my name and my smiling face right here on this website that someone sent to them and said, "Hey, by the way, your coworkers,
early.
He's got one foot out the door already." That doesn't,
right.
It's not a good look. So now it's a little different because I've already made a plan to start working part-time this fall, and that's not going to be a long-term solution. So my colleagues know that I, may be retiring early, or at least, departing from this job at some point in the next maybe year or two. So now I'm less concerned. It's kind of funny. I like to put little hints out there, little Easter eggs, or just blatantly, pictures of my kids and stuff like that. So if someone that does know me reasonably well were to happen to find the blog, and then they would tell me, and I would know that my blog is getting that wider reach. When people I know in real life found it totally independently of me.
Thanks for the compliment. I found you. I know who you are. Oh,
yeah. So there are little things in there that are fairly personal, and I'm just hoping for. Well, I shouldn't say hoping for. I wouldn't mind maintaining this anonymity for quite a while, really, as long as it lasts. But if I'm found out, that's not a big deal either.
Now, what does that mean that you can retire early or that you're financially independent? Can you give us like a working definition? Because I think, the audience members, and including me, some people have a different sense of what that means. Does that mean that you just basically live off of the interest from your savings, or dividends from your stocks? Like, what does that mean? Like, you can retire early?
Yeah, I guess a broad definition is that your lifestyle is funded by the investments that you've made. And, that can be passive income from real estate. That can be a number of things. But the simplest working definition, and kind of the one I used when I started the blog, was if you have at least 25 times your annual anticipated spending, then you can pretty reliably expect that to last a very long time. It's based on a study out of Trinity College, and they came up with a whole bunch of scenarios, looked at past returns and retiring at various time points in the past. And if you had at least 25 times your spending, you would start spending 4% of your entire nest egg, and that should last at least 30 years. And it's not necessarily that the money dwindles down to zero by 30 years. In fact, the average outcome is to have, I believe it's 2.7 times as much money as you started with 30 years later. But if you have particularly bad years early on after retiring, or just a overall average low returns during that 3-decade period, you may be cutting it close. And I think the failure rate was maybe 3 or 4%. At that 25x multiple. So if you want to be even safer, save 30 to 33% of what you expect to spend annually in retirement. So if you have a $100,000 budget, you're looking at 3 to 3.3 million, and then you're spending at a rate of 3 to 3.3%, and that is very low. And people much smarter than I have done a whole lot of number crunching to conclude that, barring some massive zombie apocalypse, you're probably okay at that 3.5%, 3.3% withdrawal rate.
So basically, you're trying to save as much as possible, but you're trying to decrease the amount of your expenses, your expenditures on a yearly basis.
Right. I could easily spend my way out of financial independence if I decided that, and I'm kind of using 80,000 a year as our anticipated number, but if I wanted to double that, well, then I'm not financially independent anymore. So it's all a function of the math. You want to get rims on your car? Right, 24-inch blades.
You know what I'm saying? If you want to do that, okay, you'll be having to go deeper into the savings pot, I guess.
Right, and I should qualify my 80,000 a year. I started tracking spending once I had a blog. I never really kept a really close track beforehand, but I thought it would be worthwhile to have that data to share with people. And last year we actually spent 62,000.
I read that post.
There's a lot of cheats in there, right? I said, well, I cheat. I cheat because I don't have a mortgage. I cheat because health insurance is mostly paid for my employer, and I cheat because I no longer carry term life or disability. Those are great products that docs should have until they become financially independent, and at that point they become superfluous. You don't need them because you.
Why are you using big words on this show?
I know. I shouldn't even try. It just comes out all gobbledygook.
Now, speaking of such, the last portion of your name, on fire, F.I.R.E. That's actually an acronym. What does that mean? F.I.R.E.
F.I. is financial independence, which we've talked about ad nauseum. R.E. is retire early, which is one of many options you have once you have invested and saved enough to call yourself financially independent. So it's just a fun little play on words, and I went with physician on fire. You get the visual of a burning doctor. You get the alliteration of the physician on fire, the two F sounds, and then the acronym it works. But I don't focus as much on the early retirement aspect, although I have found that when I do, it's a popular subject among physicians. There are
people burnt out, I think.
Burned out docs, and and it seems to be getting worse and worse, and increased regulations, the whole 9 yards. That could be a whole different episode just talking about why physicians are looking for a way out. And I would love to see the whole system change and have fewer bureaucratic, red tape and all of those things that, lead us to look for a way out. But I can't fix all that. But I can tell people how to, realize that maybe spending money, to try to find happiness isn't the answer, but save enough money to give yourself some amount of freedom to either choose a different job where money is no concern, freedom to volunteer your services abroad, freedom to work less, like I'm going to be doing soon, or freedom to not work at all. If you can achieve that, then you've got the upper hand.
And speaking of spending and relating it to physicians, most people think doctors have a lot of wealth because they are high wage earners, but you're saying in your post, those are two separate things, right? And on your blog, there's a distinction, obviously, between having wealth and being a high wage earner. Can you describe or talk more about that?
Sure. Wealth and income are obviously two very different concepts. They become somewhat confused when the media talks about the rich as the people being those with incomes of 250,000 or more, right? Like the rich need to pay the fair share. But as you and I know, and most of our listeners know, we physicians, we start out with typically quite a bit of student loan debt, some place in our maybe early to mid 30s, and was getting a very, very late start, whereas our friends might have started working at 18 or 22, or even a lawyer that goes straight through is making that income at age 25. So yeah, we get a very late start, and then once we are actually out, then everybody knows, oh, you're an anesthesiologist. You make like $300,000 a year or something. I read it in USA
Come
Today.
buy these rims.
Yeah, exactly.
It may not be like that, but you know what I'm saying.
Or the boat, or the whatever it is. I do have a boat, and I even have a second home now. But it's just, the expectation it can be from family, from friends, from society. People they know you make six figures, maybe healthy six figures, and I expect you to drive something nice, have a nice home, dine at fancy restaurants, et cetera, and you can do some of that. You can do. I think it's Paula Pant has a blog called Afford Anything. She says you can afford anything, but you can't afford everything.
Everything, absolutely.
Yeah. So you got to kind of pick and choose and target your spending. Spend intentionally on the things that will make you happy, and figure out what works and what doesn't. And I also, I really encourage people to. I have one post, it's the Live on Half Challenge, and if you can live on half your take-home pay and use the rest to either pay down your debt or invest, you can achieve financial independence. And it's about 15 years based on average, or even a conservative.
I'll
Sure,
put the
thanks.
link on the show notes. So
yeah, even somewhat conservative. And it's probably best to look at conservative returns going forward, with valuations being rather high and interest rates being quite low, et cetera. But even with that, 15 to 20 years of living on half your take-home pay should get you to the point of financial independence.
Now, what techniques do you think medical students and residents should employ to get on the road to financial independence? And not because I know before we talked about, starting off becoming a physician is saying that you're only going to be in it for 10 years is kind of defeatist, which I agree with. But also at the same time, how do we get students, whether they're in the medical realm or even, any other healthcare realm, and then obviously residents, how do we get them thinking along the right path to get to where you're at?
Well, I guess it starts with, the loans. And I had about maybe 60,000 in student loans. My wife had another 15, so we didn't have a huge number. So it's a little disingenuous for me to talk about avoid student loans, but whatever you can do to minimize those. And if you have the option of attending state schools for undergrad and medical school, that certainly helps. That's what I did. If you live in chunky apartments next to campus like I did, that'll help too. Really just don't take every dollar that will be loaned to you, because you may be paying 6.8% like people are now, and that interest may be capitalizing over the course of your residency and just growing. So minimizing those loans as much as you can will certainly help. And then as you get further along, and you start looking at what type of residency and where you might want to live, don't necessarily make choices of specialty based on that, but just realize that, and that the data is out there, easy to find. Not all doctors make the same amount of money. So maybe if you're trying to choose between two equally desirable specialties for your personality, it's okay to take money into account. I think we're really kind of conditioned to not think about money at all. That's terrible. You shouldn't do that. It's all about the patient. But it's all about you too and your family, and it's okay to take that as one factor when you decide what to do. And then as far as where you choose to live, now you may be wanting to live close to family, and I can certainly understand that, where your friends are, where you've grown up. If you've never left, a certain area, that might be where you want to be. But again, realize that's a choice that you make. And if you choose to live someplace outside of the big cities, typically away from the coasts, something like rural Pennsylvania or rural Minnesota, or anywhere in the heartland, and you can take advantage of what's called geographic arbitrage, and that's another post of mine. So you basically you have a lower cost of living, and you have usually higher salaries in places that are maybe considered by some people to be less desirable to live. So, I had a post, I think it was the one about my annual spending. on Doximity, it got picked up by them, and there was a pediatrician in San Francisco saying, "Well, how am I supposed to do this?" I'm like, "You're not. You can't. You're going to be living middle class and working for 30 years because a pediatrician in San Francisco is going to make enough to get by and maybe max out the 401k, but that's about it,
Unless you're a pediatrician that works for Google.
Yeah, take care of Larry Page, his babies, I guess. But yeah, no, it's so think about those things, geographic arbitrage.
I think that's a good point because me already, and the audience members know I'm originally from New York, the New Jersey area, and my wife is also from the same area, and all of our families there. Yeah, we'd love to be close to them, but trying to find a job there and also housing there and also pay off literally close to $700,000 in student loan debt. It's not going to happen.
No, it's stifling.
Yeah, so we've been able to find a place that we're very happy with in central Pennsylvania, and we like it here. And it is exactly what you're saying, geographical arbitrage. And we've been able to make significant, debt reduction on our loans, and we've been able to kind of even start a little bit of some savings, which I wanted to talk to you more about, kind of managing savings and when you have loan debt. But yeah, I agree with that point. What you're saying, and as a matter of fact, I'll put the show notes. I'll put your blog post about those tips in there. And you say you made that choice to go to central Pennsylvania, and then that's a sacrifice. Some people say, well, I can't do that. My family's here. It's like, yeah. So you make the choice, just like Dr. Darko did. He made a choice to go somewhere where he could earn more and pay down some of those loans, and it's maybe not the choice you want to make, but if you want to actually get ahead and get out from underneath those loans and start investing, then it's a choice. It's a choice, and you don't have to make it, but just recognize the consequences of any choice, and you always have a choice. Now, always people want to know, like, how can I be down? How am I able to do what Physician on Fire does? And I think you've been very open and honest about what you've done. But can you just briefly, just from a 30,000 foot view, or taking a wider perspective, like, tell us the tips, the high yield tips of what you did to get yourself on the road to financial independence?
Sure. I can go as far back as high school, where I worked really hard and got a bunch of scholarships. And
I guess but let's fast forward more towards like once you started doing locums and you left at that point, like how did you handle debt? How did you handle savings? How did you handle stock market? What what funds to invest in? Not the specific ones, but just like, how did you manage all of those three things? Because I think a lot of the listeners and even myself, I've gone through that. We've gone through the process of, should I just take care of all my debt and just kind of maybe just do stuff in my 401k and get a match, or should I just even forego everything in terms of savings, like Dave Ramsey says, and just put towards debt? Or should, you take more of that arbitrage and say, well, if I can get 7, maybe even 12% in the stock market, maybe I don't pay down debt and I just go into the stock market. Like, what did you do?
Right. So, yeah, it does come down to the individual, because, you say, what did I do? And you really have to look at my circumstance, which may be different than someone else's. And it's certainly different than yours, with your guys' loans being almost 10 times what mine were. But what I did is I did not pay down the loans right away. I kind of let that ride because I was able to get those refinanced or consolidated to a really low rate. So that's one thing that almost anyone can do, is either pursue the public service loan forgiveness, PSLF. If that's not a good option, then you can refinance your loans once you're in attending. And there are actually a couple options while you're still in residency. It might be a little bit of a higher rate. So try to get the lowest interest rate that you can, not necessarily the lowest payment that you can. And I do have a student loan resource page, so if you want to throw that in the show notes, that'd be great. Which gets all kinds of resources there.
Shop for everything, man.
I'm trying to help people, and then with investing, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's best to keep it simple. There are studies that show the average investor in a fund significantly underperforms the fund, which makes no sense until you realize it's because people buy in when the market is good and they bail out when things are dropping. And so if you can just buy and hold, own it and forget it. I mean, there are some advanced strategies with tax loss harvesting and things that you don't need to worry about right now. But just buy a simple, and again, I'll refer to the 3-fund portfolio of total stock market and or the S&P 500. They behave very similarly. Bonds, if you want some, I have a pretty low allocation of 10% to bonds and cash. And then international, again, is optional, but there's a total international mutual fund. Just own basically all the international stocks, and you get what the market gives. And people that try to outperform the market tend to underperform. A few get lucky, or are they're Warren Buffett, and they're very, very intelligent, and they work all day and all night at finding the right companies. But even really smart people with access to a whole lot of good information tend to underperform just the total market, which is counterintuitive, especially people like you and I. We've spend our whole lives learning and educating ourselves to get a leg up, and you assume that if you devote your life and your time to getting a leg up on everybody else in the stock market, you should be able to outperform. But studies show it just doesn't really work for the vast majority of people.
Just put it on the stock market, or at least on the index fund, and let it ride. Basically.
Exactly. That's what I've done.
Index fund. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
keep your expenses low. I didn't mention that. There are lots and lots of different mutual funds, and some of the best ones have what we call an expense ratio, just the cost to own that fund for a year, of less than 0.1%. So, there's no reason to buy an S&P fund that charges you 1% when Vanguard charges you 0.04%.
So we can't spend too little time on it. This is something that's a really big deal, expenses. And yeah. I wanted to ask you about that, because that's a really big deal. So, obviously Vanguard and Fidelity, they have some of the lowest expense ratios out there. But also there are these new things that are coming up called Roboadvisors. What are your thoughts on Roboadvisors, where you go online and you sign up for whatever it may be, a Betterment, a Wealthfront, a Schwab, and going and investing that way with lower fees, quote unquote, compared to human financial advisors? What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that, I was already a do-it-yourself investor before they came along, so I haven't had any experience with them, but I have read some reviews, and I have a pretty good idea of how they work. So I think if you are willing to learn nothing about money and investing, then a human is probably your best advisor. Okay. And you want to make sure they are fiduciary. Now, it looks like that fiduciary rule is going to go into effect. I think it's the Department of Justice that said that will happen. So hopefully, I think tomorrow actually part of it becomes law, and then January 1st is when it's in full effect. I just heard that on NPR this morning. Okay. But long story short, you want to make sure that it is a fiduciary advisor, and preferably not fee-based, which means they can sell you commission products, but fee only, which means they'll only take either a flat fee or a percentage of your assets. And of course, the more money you have, the less enticing it is to have someone earn a percentage of your assets each year. So, but you asked about robo-advisors. So if you're willing to learn a little bit more about, where your money is and what it's doing, I think a robo-advisor is a decent option. Their fees tend to be about 0.25% per year, which isn't huge. It's pretty small. And they do offer some services, and like, for example, in a taxable account, they'll do some automatic tax loss harvesting, which you can do manually if you know what it is, and take the time to pay some attention to your funds, especially when you hear that the market's dropping. You can take a look and see if you have anything that you can sell at a loss and buy something similar, and it works out quite well. And that's a topic we don't need to discuss at length today, but the best is still do it yourself. My average fees are about 0.08%. That's a weighted average.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow.
There's a blog post on that too. I'll send it to you after the show.
That will be in the show notes too, audience.
And in the post, investment fees will cost you millions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I follow Agnes, Agatha, Jermaine, and Jack. And they've each got different income level and different investment levels and how much money it will cost them over a lifetime. And it's staggering how much even 1%, 2%, or 3% per year can add up.
Yeah, and that's a very big deal. Thank you very much for highlighting that. Now, I want to talk a little bit of shop talk with you, which I know we're not allowed to because this is Docs Outside the Box, but I want to go through a scenario with you, and I want you to kind of take our audience through what you would do in this situation, or at least what's your advice.
Sure.
So almost like a Dear Physician on Fire section.
Yeah.
All right. So here's a scenario. So you have a 32-year-old female status post. I got to use the medical term.
Yeah.
Status post graduating from general surgery residency. She has $200,000 in student loan debt. That debt ranges between, let's say, 5 to 9% in interest. She's just signed a contract for a job that is going to pay about $350,000 a year. She has no retirement savings, and she is very scared of the stock market. As a matter of fact, her mother has told her to just basically save everything she can underneath her bed. So for someone like this woman, this future surgeon or this surgeon, what's your advice for her?
Well, as much as I love my mother, I would tell her not to listen to her mother. That's the first thing, at least regarding the money under the mattress. With her debt of $200,000, income of $350,000, she'll probably have a good $250,000 after taxes left over. So, if she was just dead set on getting rid of that debt as soon as possible, she could easily live actually better than a resident. I was going to say live like a resident. You can live a little better than a resident. Let's say I'm going to assume she's single.
Noodles with cheese, then.
Yeah,
cheese.
right.
Not
You
just
can add
ramen
cheese,
by itself.
maybe a little bacon sprinkled on there. Yeah. But let's say she can spend a third of her take-home pay, which would be about $80,000, which is plenty, even if she's maybe got a mortgage on a townhome or something, and pay that off within a year and a half, 2 years. Now that's not necessarily the best way to go, especially if she ends up joining a 501 or I'll just say a nonprofit hospital and qualifies for public service loan forgiveness. And as a general surgery resident for 5 years, she could be 5 years in and then be 5 years away from some loan forgiveness. So that kind of depends on what she's done already. But yeah, she could knock that out real quick. And as far as being afraid of the stock market, we tend to be afraid of things we don't understand. Mm-hmm. And snakes and heights, but there's not much we can do about those things. But you can learn about the things you don't understand. And so I would recommend that she do some reading so she knows what she's doing when she invests in the stock market, and that it's not really gambling because the odds are in your favor, not the house's favor. And I could name a few resources I would probably recommend.
Why don't you let us know about that?
Yeah, and I'm not going to plug my site this time, but
you should. You should.
No, you need the basics, and I tend to go a little beyond the basics because I know there are a ton of places where you can learn what is a 401k and what is a Roth IRA, etc. So I don't focus too much on that kind of stuff, but Bogleheads, Bogle Heads, is a great website, and they've also written a book, Bogleheads book. So I would definitely look to those. The wiki on the website is fantastic. There's a blogger named Jim Collins. He's one of two Jim Collinses that has written books, but his website is jlcollinsnh.com, and his book is The Simple Path to Wealth. And on his website, he's got what's called the Stock Series, and I think it's approaching 30 different blog posts. But if you read through all of those, you'll have a pretty good understanding of what you're doing when you invest in the stock market and why you should. interesting. Jim Collins is the guy that I was visiting the day before I met up with you last summer in Green Bay, and so little fun little connection there. And then the White Coat Investor is one more that I'll put a plug in for. He wrote a book specifically for medical students, residents, young attendings to get a better handle on their finances. So that book is just called The White Coat Investor. And then on his website, which is also whitecoatinvestor.com, he's got a series for beginners on there that will get her in the right direction.
Excellent answer. I really appreciate you going through that. And for the audience, I hope you guys learned a lot from that. Well, Physician on Fire, we're getting towards the end of the interview, so I want to ask you some quick, fast questions where you just tell me, I'll ask you a question, you just tell me what comes off of your dome piece. You cool with that?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, what's one thing you want listeners to get from this podcast?
I would say that you really want to focus on setting some money aside. People think that they love their job and they will want to do this for 30 years. And that's how I felt 10 years ago. And I think that's how everyone starts off feeling. But I would make sure you start saving and investing, really just to insure yourself against what might come in the future.
Good answer. What can the audience expect from you in 5 years?
5 years from now? Well, we haven't talked too much about my plans, but I do plan to go part-time soon and most likely retire a year or two after that. And so we've got some family adventures planned. Ideas that we've tossed around are taking an RV and just traveling around the country, seeing all the national parks out west and historic sites out east. I'll be writing about that. We may spend a year abroad, just go someplace where they speak a different language and learn the language. And there should be a lot of exciting stuff for me to have done by then. 2 years from now, maybe nothing too terribly exciting, but 5 years, we'll have probably lived a pretty interesting life then.
Hey man, I can't wait. Now, do you think you'll still continue writing as Physician on Fire?
I would really like to. If I ever feel like it's too much because we're busy traveling and maybe homeschooling and other things, I could just slow down my pace. Right now I post 3 times a week, and I could just post less. But I would love to share with my audience what we're up to and really show people that financial independence can allow you to do some pretty incredible things that just aren't possible if you're tied down to a location and tied down to a job.
So you did mention that Paula Pant's term, which is you can afford anything, you just can't afford everything. So let's just say, for example, you could afford the DeLorean, right?
Yeah.
And you could go back to whatever year it was when you were a young pre-med student. Physician on Fire, what kind of advice would you have given yourself back then?
Well, if I actually had, the sports almanac, I'd slip that in my back pocket.
You know what I'm saying?
Aside from that, well, that's kind of a related answer, but I ended up working for a hospital that went bankrupt. That was my first quote unquote permanent job. And I would advise myself to stay away and avoid that whole turmoil and that point in my life. But I guess just general advice, not knowing the future, is just that it gets better with every step. Med school was tough and it was stressful and it was so busy, but it gets better. Residency is better than med school. I think you actually have a little more money, a little more independence, a little more respect from people you take care of. And then when you become an attending, that's even better. And then 10 years after you've been an attending, then you have more respect, more experience, hopefully more money. So it's going to get better. That's my advice.
Love it. Now, the last sentence that I'm going to ask you is the same sentence that I ask all my guests. It's a hashtag. It's I'm not just a doc. So the sentence I present to you, Physician on Fire, is I'm not just a doc. I'm not just a doc. I'm just an ordinary, average guy. And that's, well, in some ways it's true. In some ways it's not. But, I mean, the reason I have this whole financial independence status and started writing this website is that I have kind of lived like an ordinary average guy, and if I hadn't and I had spent as much money as most physicians do in their first 10 years, I would be like an ordinary average doc. So Well, I think that's a very honest, very poignant answer. And Physician on Fire, I just want to take a moment just to acknowledge you for that. I think that's the key to your success. Is that you've stayed grounded throughout the entire process. You haven't allowed lifestyle creep, and thoughts of just buying one thing to kind of take over, just the most important things, which is family and experiences. And not to say that, individual items aren't important, but I think there's a hierarchy in which they fit. And it seems as though, based off of following you on your website and meeting you in person, because when I met you in person, you were wearing a cape and ties,
yeah.
right? But you
The
just
mask.
you just seem so down to earth and easygoing, and I really appreciate that about you. And to me, I think that's the biggest key to your success. And it's really impressive to see your website grow. It's really impressive to see where you're at right now. And I just want to acknowledge you for, just taking the time out to teach people who will come to your website about all that you know. So thank you so much for what you do.
Oh, you're very welcome. And no, it's been great chatting with you again. Like you said, when we met in person, I was maimed. I had done the Tough Mudder that day before and dislocated my shoulder a few times, and I was hurting. So,
Physician on Fire don't get hurt.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I found out my
Physician on Fire bleed on
superpowers
the
are
inside.
not all that I thought they might be. But yeah, and I don't want to leave people with the impression that I live kind of a life of deprivation. I think that might be the initial impression people might get when they see my budget and whatnot, but we do live pretty good. We do, we travel internationally with and without our kids. We have our little cabin that actually my family just left for today, and I'll be joining them off and on throughout the summer. I think we have it really good, and there are studies out there. And sorry that I'm prolonging this interview, but
it's good, man.
Yeah, that say, beyond a certain spending point or income, you just don't get a whole lot more happiness out of every individual dollar, greatly diminishing returns. And so I think it's proven to be true for me, and maybe it's not true for everybody, but every dollar you spend beyond the first, $75,000, $100,000 a year, it adds something, but not a whole lot. And so, once you take that to heart and realize that it's probably true, you can easily get ahead and find your own financial freedom.
Love it. Thank you very much for that bit of advice. Physician on Fire, man, I really appreciate you being on the show. I know it's very rare to get you on voice and get you in person, but I do appreciate you making time for us. We got to do it again.
Absolutely. It was great talking to you.
Thanks for being on the show.
And that's a wrap. Episode 28 is over. It is history. Really want to know what you thought about that episode. That was really a fun episode for me. I just kind of felt like we had a really good dynamic, and I definitely would like to hear what you guys have to say about that episode, which leads me to feedback. I always read all the feedback, whether it's through any of the social media outlets or if you email me directly. Now, it may take a minute for me to respond back to you. That's a different story, but I always make sure that I get back to everyone in a timely fashion. So please remember to reach out to me through Instagram, through Twitter, through Facebook, or you could also email me at docsotb@gmail.com. If you are unsure exactly how to reach me, just go to the website, and on the website, the links to my social media accounts are all there. So I made it really easy for you all to reach out and reach me. Also, please leave a review on iTunes if you found this show to be helpful. Remember the way how the algorithms work with iTunes. When there is feedback, when there's a review, that helps the show to move up the podcast rankings, which means I can get other new listeners to listen to the show, which makes the show more popular. So please remember to do that. It only takes about 15 to 30 seconds. You can do that through your phone, or you can do that obviously through direct links, which are in the show notes. So please remember to do that. And before we go, as always, remember you've got one life, so make it count, and remember to live outside the box.